All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Go ahead and get started here. If you got your questions, go ahead and post them. Should be below the video if you're on a smaller screen, or to the right of the video if you're on a larger screen. All right, let's keep going here. So we'll start here with Mac M. Says Q having a hard time translating power from irons to the driver with TSG. You have me hitting my 7 iron 185 to 190. Get to the driver and only hitting 230 to 245. Is there something that could not be translating to driver? Is a common issue. So what I would look at is what your club head speed is with your driver. Because that's really the determining factor of what your potential distance is. Generally, you're going to get about 2.6, 2.7 yards per mile per hour. So if you're swinging 100 miles an hour, you should get 260 to 270, like maxed out. Like that's if you hit, uh, you know, hit it in the center of the face, good launch conditions, all that stuff, right? So if you're not, right, so let's say you're swinging 100 miles an hour with your driver, which if you're hitting your 7 iron 185, 190, I would venture to say you're probably swinging your driver faster than 100 miles an hour. So what I would look at, or you should be swinging your driver faster than that, right? So that'd be something I would look at. If you're swinging, if you're swinging pretty close, because I mean, to hit your 7 iron 185, 190, you probably need to be swinging almost 100 with your 7 iron, right? Probably pretty close to that, unless you're just de-lofting it a ton, which could be what's going on. If you're de-lofting your driver too much, you might need more loft on your driver. There are pros out there that have a lot of shaft lean with their driver. Not a lot of them. Most of them have very little to no shaft lean. But like a Dustin Johnson, a John Rahm, they play high lofted drivers because they have a lot of shaft lean impact. I think Dustin Johnson plays like a 12.5 degree driver or 11.5 degree. I can't remember how much it was. Right. So yeah, that could be part of what's going on, is that your launch conditions aren't being met. Right. But let's say that you're swinging, close to 100 miles an hour with your 7 iron and about the same with your driver, then I would probably get fit for your clubs to make sure, the driver is not holding you back from swinging with the proper speed. So that kind of be what I'd be looking at doing, is look at what's your club head speed with these clubs, right? And then look at, trying to bridge the gap. You may need to get fitted. You may need to look at, you might not be hitting your driver in the middle of the face. Your driver could be cracked. I had a similar situation where I had a friend of mine who was hitting their 5 wood off the tee farther than they were their driver. And the club head speed and everything was more with the driver. It just ball wasn't going anywhere. We tested it. We looked and we used the foot power spread. We looked where he was hitting it on the face. He was hitting it on the ones he was hitting in the middle of the face. It just wasn't going. It was going as far as his 5 would. So I thought there probably had to be something. I was inspecting the club, right, and I was running my hand along the face, and I felt a little ridge, like to the naked eye. I couldn't really see it, but until I felt that little ridge on the club face, I realized that his club face was cracked. So that could be what's going on. I would inspect your club, inspect your driver, see what's going on. I mean, if you're swinging, let's say you're swinging 110 with your driver, right? You're hitting it in the middle of the face. You have, you're hitting up on it. You have good launch conditions and all that stuff. But the ball's just not going anywhere, right? You're not getting the ball speed from the club head speed that you should be, right? You should get, on a well-struck drive, you should get about 1.5 times your club head speed. So if you swing 100 miles an hour, your ball speed should be about 150, right? So it's just something you have to go in and test to kind of see. You have to investigate, what's going on. It's not as simple as, I'm swinging 185 with my 7 iron, 230 with my driver. I'm hitting it 230 with my driver. Like, why am I not getting more distance? You have to investigate. So that's what I would do, as I just go investigate and see what's going on there. All right, so Peo says shallowing fix made huge difference. A video Skytrack show club into out, shallow and solid shots, but shallowing has not stopped early extension, and I believe I could gain distance, solve So I could gain distance solving this issue. P1 to P4, no early extension. After transition, head stays down, but right hip moves toward ball. I think my issue is with leg action and hips are not opening up and look level. My left leg looks too flexed through impact. So first and foremost, if you get rid of your early extension, you will not necessarily gain distance. That's not necessarily going to be the result of that. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind. Hard to say without seeing your swing exactly, because again, a little bit of your hips moving toward the ball some is not necessarily a bad thing, especially the way that you're describing it, right? So it sounds like you're describing you're good at the top, and then when you come into impact, right, you're moving towards the ball a little bit. So one thing we also want to understand is that helps you to shallow out the club. If I stand up out of my posture, that helps me to shallow out the club, right? So if I'm coming down steep and I do that, see how that shallows the club, right? So that could be, one thing that you're doing to try to help you to shallow out the club. So what I would recommend doing is doing a shallowing drill where you work through the 20-minute shallowing fix with the emphasis on doing it without early extending, right? So that would be kind of the route that I would take with it, because going through the 20-minute shallowing fix is not going to necessarily fix early extension. So that's what we understand. The goal is to get you to shallow out the club. The goal is not necessarily to fix early extension or stay in your posture, although it can help, right? But it's not necessarily going to, because standing up out of your posture is a way to shallow out the club. So I would just work through it with the emphasis on that. So I would do the chair drill where you put a chair behind you, right? And you got to keep your hip on the chair. So backswing, right? I'm on the chair. Sounds like you're good to this point. But when I start my downswing, I want to flex my hips and push my hips into the chair. And then I want to get my left hip on the chair at impact, right? So working through the 20-minute shallowing fix, doing that should help you, and drilling that and making that second nature should help you to get rid of that. But let's talk about what's actually happening to get you to get rid of the early extension. What we have to understand is how we start the downswing is the most important part with it. Because typically when people start the downswing, they start it by extending their hips, right? So that looks something like this. Here I am at the top, and then I start my downswing like this, right? So what we want to do is flex the hips, right? So we're going to be here, and then we're going to flex the hips, right? So flexing the hips is making the angle between my legs and my upper body smaller. This is flexing the hips. This is extending the hips, right? So if I'm doing the chair drill and doing the 20-minute shallowing fix, I want to actually push my hips back. A lot of people think that they're doing a squat move. That's not really what we're doing. We're not doing this, right? We're doing this, where I'm pushing my hips back. That's the flexing of the hips that we want to have. It's more like that, right? Now, when I start my downswing, I also want to look at my legs, right? My lead leg, when I in my backswing, my lead leg is going to flex and move in, right? When I start my downswing, I'm going to flex my hips, but I'm also going to remain flexed in my lead leg, and I'm going to bow it out. So that's going to look like this, right? So I'm up at the top. I'm going to bow that out. So I'm moving pressure into my lead side. I'm flexing my hips. I'm bowing out my lead leg. And now from here, right, now I can push up out of the ground and rotate my body and extend my hips up and through, right? But I have to flex my hips first to be able to do that. So that's really what you're trying to do there, right? And then my trail leg is just going to match that flex, right? So I'm going to be here, my lead arm parallel, right? My right knee is going to match that flex, and then from there, I can push up out of it and keep rotating through. So I would work through the 20-minute shallowing fix with the hip and leg moves in mind, doing the chair drill, and it should help you to get on the right track. So Dana says in one of the wedge videos, Clay says, or Clay uses a 56 degree wedge and says initially the shaft lean should reduce that to 47 degrees. What about other wedges? Yeah, so it's going to take, around the same around the same. So it's going to be, if you have a 60-degree wedge, you're going to take off, 10 to 12 degrees. It's going to be, 50 to 48, something like that. Dana W says to clarify, he meant the ideal spin. The loft should be 47 degrees with the 56-degree wedge. My question is, does that change with other different lofts? Well, like it can be, so it's not necessarily 47. It can be around 50. Really what it comes down to is a lot of it comes down to the conditions as well. But generally speaking, what happens is you reach like what's called spin loft mountain, which is where you get too big of a spin loft. And then that spin loft actually causes the ball to slip, right? And then you don't get as much spin, but you do get more height, right? So your angle of descent is going to be steeper, right? Which can give the ball stopping power, because that's really what can make the ball stop on the green is spin and angle of descent, right? So if my ball is coming in flatter, it can have a lot of spin on it, but because it's coming in flatter, it's going to skip, right? And it may have a lot of spin on it, and after that initial skip, it may stop, but it's going to skip. Now, if I have a lot of spin on it and it's coming in more steeply, right? I have a steeper angle of descent, a more vertical angle of descent, then that ball can actually go backwards. It can hit and actually go backwards, right? So that's really what it comes down to. So, but you can have moisture on the face. When we talk about spin loft, what he's talking about is like imperfect conditions, right? So it may not be the same for if you have grass. It's not a simple question to answer as guess what I'm getting at, because I thought you were just talking about like if you're de-lofting the club, right? How much loft are you taking off? And generally with a wedge, if you're trying to get that launch in that 30 degree, sub 30 degree, you need to be taking, probably 9 to 12 degrees off, meaning your hands need to be 9 to 12 degrees forward, right? But if you're talking about spin loft, right, which for those of you who aren't familiar, what spin loft is, it's the angle that's created between your angle of attack and the loft on the club at impact, right? So when we say a 56-degree wedge, what that is if I hold this club straight up and down, the shaft straight up and down, that's the loft on the club. But if I'm coming into contact and I have shaft lean, right, that's the dynamic loft. I'm de-lofting the club. Or if I have backward shaft lean, I'm adding loft, right? So generally what you're going to see is players are going to be like this when they're hitting wedges. They're going to have 9, 12 degrees of shaft lean, sometimes more than that, to drive the ball in lower. And that gives them a little bit more control of it. But spin loft mountain is generally around 50 some degrees, low 50s. But again, that's variable depending on the conditions, right? If I have absolute perfect conditions, right, for spin, that would be a tight lie, a firm lie, a dry lie, right? That's going to be a great lie for me to get friction right between the ball and the face. My spin loft mountain is going to be higher, right? But if I'm in wet, plush condition, you're going to have slippage on the face. So yeah, as you go into higher wedges, you're going to be more susceptible. That's why it doesn't really make a lot of sense to have like a 70-degree wedge, right? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to have it because you're not necessarily going to get more spin with it because it's going to be slipping on the face, right? It's not going to be gripping the ball quite as much. But you can get a higher, it can give the illusion of more spin because you can hit it higher, which is going to make the angle of descent steeper, more vertical, which is one way that you can stop the ball. It's just not the way that the best players typically do it. Usually the best players are stopping it with spin. Peo says, makes sense to work with a chair. The strange thing about my EE is that my head and upper body does not have upward, but actually goes down, which I think is good. Yeah. So, like I said, I would have to see your swing to know for sure what's going on. I would actually pay attention more to what's happening with the club and not so much what's happening with your body, right? Focus on what's happening with the club, and that's the most important thing. So Jeff B says, on my irons, I can't hit a small fade or a small draw, but when it comes to the driver, I tend to have a bad slice. Any ideas on what to look at to correct? Yeah, so if you're hitting a big slice, that means the face is too open, and you need to get the face more closed. And you may also need to swing more into out to be able to accommodate that. So what I'd recommend doing is working through the 20-minute shadowing fix with your driver, because the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to get the face closed and you're going to get the ball to hook, right? That's the best way to fix a slice, is to learn how to hook it, right? So you're going to get the ball to hook, and once you're able to do that and you get good at it, you get those 10 in a row, then you go to drill number 2, which is going to be where you're going to get the ball to start to the right and hook, right? This means that you're going to be shallowing out the club. And then drill number 3, that's when you tone it down to get whatever ball flight that you want. So that's what I'd recommend doing to get to the 20-minute shallowing fix. So you can click the instruction tab at the top and then click the 20-minute shallowing fix from there. But yeah, if you're slicing, it just means the face is too open. So Peo says, other issue is that I overpronate and supinate, which creates great smash factor, but pull draws. How can I quiet down my arms? I mean, if you're hitting pull draws, that just means that you're swinging too much to the left and you need to swing more to the right. So that I wouldn't necessarily say that you're over pronating or supinating. And I don't know exactly what you're over pronating and supinating. That can apply to many body parts. But yeah, if you're hitting pull draws, it just means you're not shallowing it enough. So you need to swing more into out. So what I would do, very, very simple drill. If you have a box, put the box down, put a box behind your ball, and slightly outside your ball. So right there. So imagine my target is straight forward. So if I were to swing out to in even a little bit, I'm going to hit that box. This forces me to swing from the inside to get the ball to start to the right and curve to the left. All right, keep the questions coming. So Dan W says chips and short pitches. My practice swings seem perfect, and I skull the ball across the green. Psychology, what might help? Yeah, I would look at the I would look at the difference between the swings. If your practice swing really looks good, I would look at really look at the practice swing closely, because a lot of times when we make a practice swing, one of the most common things that I see is that the club face is wide open, right? That's one of the most common things that I see. So they'll make a practice swing where the motion looks great, right? Where we're not casting it, we have our hands a little bit ahead, we're hitting the ground in a great spot, like everything looks great. But then when you look at it closely, the club face is wide open, right? So that's the most common thing that I see. So when you go to hit the ball, your brain says, I want to hit the ball straight forward, not way to the right. So what your brain may do is it may release the club earlier to try to get the club face closed or get the club face back to square, and that can cause you to skull it, right? Because that can cause you to lift up to make room for the club, or you may bottom out earlier or whatever it might be. Club face is pointing at the target. Yeah, so then I would say it's mental then. You're trying to help the ball up in the air instead of trusting the motion of the club, right? So I try to keep your hands nice and soft and really focus on turning your body back and through, turning your chest back and through. Some of it may be the technique, right? Whereas if you look at your practice, because here's the thing, a lot of times on a practice swing, like I said, if the ball was really there, it wouldn't be a good shot, right? So people look at the practice swing, they see a great motion. I'd make sure that you're actually hitting the ground, right? Because in your practice swing, if you're not hitting the ground or hitting the ground in the right spot, it really wouldn't be any different, right, than it would before. So I would look and see if the swings are actually different or the same, and see if you're actually doing something different when the ball is there versus when the ball is not. And then I would look at your practice swing and if there is a difference there and kind of see, okay, am I hitting the ground in the right spot? Is my club face pointing in the right direction? You alluded to it being squared up, those sorts of things. And then from there, you can make adjustments. But I can go over the overall. It could be that the technique's not very good and you don't have a lot of margin for error. So I'll talk about the technique real quick here. So again, I feel like I've gone over this a ton in the office hours the last couple of weeks. A lot of questions about chipping the last couple of weeks. But anyway, I like to have feet close together, a club head or so apart. The reason why I like this is because it enables you to more easily stay centered, right? And be able to control where you're hitting the ground, your ground interaction, right? So if I have a wider stance, that's going to promote a weight shift, which I don't want to have for this shot, right? I want to have my feet close together so I stay more centered. And if anything, I want to favor more on my lead side. I want to kind of keep my weight on my lead side, right? And then for the setup, I like to have the ball position for your normal trajectory pretty much in the middle, right? So I'm going to have that in the middle of the stance. That's going to allow me to come in pretty level on this ball, right? And I'm going to be able to, have less digging of the club or be less likely to dig the club. Excuse me. And then the next thing that we want to do is, as far as the shot is concerned. Oh, let me talk about the feet again. So with me, I like to set up with the feet a little bit open. It helps me to keep everything moving through the shot. Imagine if you set up closed like this and how my body would have to kind of stop and then the club would have to release. So if I'm able to keep my body moving through the shot, I'm going to have a much smoother swing and I'm going to be able to control things much more easily. So now let's talk about the actual shot itself. Once I get here, I want to have nice soft hands. I don't want to be holding onto the club like a death grip. I want to have nice, soft, and supple hands. I want to let the weight of the club kind of let my wrists, the weight of the club and the change of the momentum of the club, I want that to actually be able to move my wrists. So a good way to kind of get this feeling, just kind of bring the club back and let the club, feel that club kind of move your wrists, right? That's what's going to create the hinge. I'm not hinging this up. I'm not taking my wrists and holding it tightly and hinging it up. I'm not really folding my arm way up. I'm keeping my arms relatively straight, right? Soft, but they're straight, right? Meaning I'm not hyperextending my arms. I'm letting my arms kind of just hang, right? And I really want to focus on turning my chest back and through, just like that, right? So back and through. And I don't need to roll open the face. I'm just going to keep that face kind of square to the arc the entire time. I don't need to flip my hands because the momentum of the club creates a little bit of lag. And then if I just keep things moving, then the club will release out in front, right? If I want to hit it lower, then I'll just put it more back in my stance. I'll put it more off my back foot here, maybe off my big toe. I'll get my hands a little bit more forward, right? And I'll just do the same thing. I'll come through and I'll just kind of drive my hands forward like this. That's if I want to bring it in low. If I want to do higher, if I go back to my normal trajectory, I might move it slightly forward of that, and then I'm just going to open the face a little bit, right? And I'm just going to make the same motion, right? And that's going to get that added loft, and putting the ball a little bit, just a hair more forward, allows the face to be a little bit have a little bit more loft on it, which allows the ball to get higher. Another thing you can do if you're struggling making good contact with the ball is you can do more of a toe down shot. So you stand a little bit closer, you play it a little bit off the toe, you choke up a little bit on it, and this just makes it a little bit easier to make contact because this part is getting underneath the ball as opposed to the entire club. Just makes it a little bit easier. I like to do that off of kind of like barrel eyes and stuff like that. So Peyo says, fair enough. However, video and SkyTrack clearly show very good into out path, but you can see my club face gets closed just at impact. I really like Clay's use of a stronger grip and have adopted this, but wonder if I should get a bit weaker and address the ball with more spin. So really what that means, here's the reason why I said that you need to swing more into out, because if your pull draw is by definition a shot that starts left and goes a little bit left, right? So if the ball is, in your case, if it's starting left, it's really just drawing too much, right? You're actually hitting more of a hook. So if you're hitting a hook, then that means that your face is too closed. So you need to get your face more open. So weakening the grip would be one thing. Weaker wrist angles could be another thing. If you're trying to bow your wrist a ton, you may not want to do that, right? Maybe having more neutral wrist conditions at impact, and maybe getting a little bit more shaft lean. Having more shaft lean gets the face more open. So those will all be things that you can do to get the face more open. But yeah, if you're calling something a pull draw, right? It's not really, if you're not swinging out to in, it's not really a pull draw, right? Because what creates a pull is an out to in path, right? But the face is squared with that path, right? A pull draw would be an out to in path with the face a little bit close to that path, right? A hook is really what you're describing, which is why I said to swing more from the inside. Either way, if you swung more from the inside, you could still get the ball to start more to the right. Now it's going to be basically a push hook, right? But it would still help you to hit the ball more on target. Daniel W says the feet too far apart might be an issue. Clay's video had me setting up my feet 2.5 to 3 club heads apart, and I'll try the open stance. Yeah, so it's really that could be part of it. I mean, it's probably not going to be that much of a difference going from this to this, right? moving your feet a club head closer. But you can certainly try it. I would just focus on the other things that I mentioned. It should help out quite a bit. Reg N says, I'm using the ping chipper to chip using a putting stroke. Would you recommend using my putting stance or the chipping stance you recommend? Whichever one works best for you. That's what I would recommend. Test it out, see which one works best for you, and that's the one I would use. So Peo says, you mentioned correcting EE would not help with gaining distance. I said it may not help. It may not help. It may not do anything as far as your distance. It may not do anything as far as anything. It may not even actually be a problem in your swing. I would have to actually see. Because if you look, Jack Nicklaus moved his hips toward the ball. Jimmy Walker moved his hips toward the ball. Zach Johnson moved his hips toward the ball. There's lots of major winning golfers that move their hips toward the ball. I think people get a little bit too obsessed with the early extension thing. And I just don't want you to be caught up in fixing something that's just not necessarily going to do anything. But then he goes on to say, but if my EE is remedied with better lag and hip action, I'm thinking that would help gain distance. It might. You just don't know, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get better lag and hip action either. Your lag and hip action, well, your hip action is definitely going to be different because that's part of what early extension is. But your lag is not likely going to change. Probably not. You're probably going to be lagging the club the same. The release might change a little bit, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be more speed there. So in order to gain more distance, you either have to gain more speed or your launch conditions have to change, right? So let's say that you're coming into contact and you look like this at contact, right? So you're early releasing the club, almost no shaft lean at contact. And then you fix your early extension, and now you're at contact and you have some shaft lean. That can certainly help you gain distance because you've changed your launch conditions, right? You've de-lofted the club, which gives the ball more energy. Now, obviously, there's a point of diminishing returns. You get the ball too low, and it doesn't actually help you hit the ball farther. But in that scenario, yeah, that will help you gain distance. It's possible that fixing your early extension will help you to use the ground better and help you to create more speed, but not necessarily. That's what we have to be careful with, is to understand is that just because you fix early extension doesn't mean it's going to necessarily make you hit the ball better or farther. It doesn't necessarily mean that. So that's why you have to be a little bit careful. Sometimes what it does sometimes is you still hit the ball the same way. You're just able to hit the ball the same way more consistently because you have more control over your face, over your club face at impact. You're able to hit the ball more in the center of the face more often, right? You're able to control your ground contact a little bit better. So, your 7-iron might be, 170 yards right now or whatever, right? And it may be the exact same if you fix your early extension. You just may be able to get it to go straighter more often and to be able to get that distance more consistently. It may not change anything about the actual characteristics of the ball flight. It just may be able to help you to achieve it more often, the ball flight that you want. Spaya says, I have good shaft lean, but it just seems I'm not using the ground and my hips look level from transition down. To a certain extent, I would just work with an instructor to get them to look at your swing and to see for sure. Because, again, if you have shaft lean, early extension may not necessarily change your club head speed. So it may not necessarily help you get distance. Here's what I recommend that you do, actually. what I recommend that you do, if your goal is to lower your handicap, which I think most golfers are. Now, if your goal is to just make your golf swing look a certain way and you could care less how you play as long as your golf swing looks a certain way, those are different goals, right? That's completely different goals. Keep doing what you're doing, right? Because obviously the early extension is something you don't like the look of. But I can tell you right now, if you get rid of it, it may or may not actually help you play better golf. It may make you swing look better, but it may or may not help you to play better golf. It doesn't always, right? That's what we have to understand. So, what I would do, and this is what I tend to do with all of my students, is first I ask them what their goals are, right? And really, what it comes down to, a lot of people tell me they just want to be more consistent and all this stuff. When the reality is that what it boils down to is lowering scores, right? It's like, well, if you're more consistent, then what's going to happen? Why do you want to be more consistent? Well, because you want to shoot lower scores, right? That's really what it comes down to. Because that's typically what most golfers tell me is they just want to be more consistent. The reality is that doesn't really tell me anything because literally everyone wants to be more consistent. Tiger wants to be more consistent. I want to be more consistent. Everyone does. What being more consistent means typically is it means that you want to have a better idea of what the ball's going to do when you hit it, right? And that's going to lead to lower scores, right? So most golfers I work with tell me, okay, I want to lower my scores. That's the ultimate goal, right? So if you want to lower your scores, what you have to look at is what's raising your scores. So I don't know what your handicap is, but let's say that you're a 15 handicap. That means that you make a lot of doubles. You probably make triples. You make some big numbers, right? So what you have to do is look at your last 5 to 10 rounds and the holes that you made double or worse on. What happened, right? What happened on those holes? Because a lot of getting to a single digit handicap or really getting to a scratch is just eliminating the big numbers. It's double bogey avoidance. I think, what is it, like a scratch golfer only makes like on average one or like a half a more birdie per round than a 10 handicap golfer. I think it's something like that. It's like a scratch makes like on average, I think like 2.1 birdies per round or something like that. And a 10 handicap makes like 1.6. It's really not that big of a difference, but it's the double bogeys. If you look at a scratch golfer, very little double bogeys. The 10 handicap golfer, there's going to be some double bogeys in there usually, right? So it's really about big number avoidance to get to that scratch level. So you have to look at, okay, what happened on those holes? Now, it's not going to be the same thing every time, but you think about what happened when I made double bogey or worse. And then from there, you're going to see trends, right? Well, you notice like, okay, well, it looks like a bad drive is kind of what, an OB drive slice to the right that causes the big number. So if that's the case, then you keep peeling back the onion to look at, okay, well, what's causing me to hit the slice? What do I need to do to get rid of the slice and get better with my driver? And if you make your weaknesses strengths, then you have no choice but to get better, right? And if you keep knocking those things out, right, then you have no choice to get better. But if you just kind of jump around from thing to thing, or you're just trying to get your swing to look a certain way, it may or may not actually help you to play better. And that's really what the Top Speed Golf system is all about. We're trying to get people not to do that so much, right? So that's why we provided basically the 5 things that we see all the best players do. So that way we know if you want to work on your swing, right, we know that these things will help, right? We know because these are what all the best players do, right? All the best players have a stable fluid spine. All the best players have a good turn. All of them do. So you're working on the things that really, really matter the most. If you notice in the Top Speed Golf system, there really isn't a lot of talk about early extension. It's really not. It's not really a part of it because it's not. There are players that are very high up that have early extension, right? So That's why I say you have to be careful zeroing in on something, because if that happens, right, then you have to look at how is this actually going to help me to shoot lower scores. Peo goes on to say, Gary Player said if he allows an 18 handicapper to hit first and second shot and he takes over, the guy is now a 4 handicapper, basically saying the difference is the short game. I don't know if I'd really agree with that necessarily. Right? I would say it's more Gary Player being such a great player, right? He's able to recover, right, from that. But you got to think about 18 handicapper. Probably they've got some OB shots, um, you know, things like that. What I will say about short game is that I do tend to like to see higher handicappers work on short game, because it's a lot easier to improve your short game than other areas. You can improve faster. It's easier to improve. So that's typically where I see where I would say that is a good place to work on things. But there's lots of different. There's 18 handicappers that have great short games and are terrible other places, and then vice versa, right? There's 18 handicappers that have terrible short games. So it's really about where your game lands. If you had an 18 handicapper that was pretty good off the tee and even with approach up with terrible around the greens, then I would say absolutely. That I mean, Gary Player might be able to make them a scratch golfer, right? Or I get probably not like a scratch golfer, but yeah, be a low single digit handicapper. But if you had a golfer that was terrible off the tee and didn't hit their irons very well, but had a great short game, which I know some of the players like that are average golfers, that's very different. So Peo goes on to say it's not that I'm fixated so much on EE, but can see dead legs and poor hips through impact. Think fixing those issues might correct EE and help gain some distance. Certainly try it. I mean, you can certainly try. And working through what I talked about would be what I would recommend that you do. All right, we got about 15 minutes left. If we have any more questions. Uh, Peo says Fred Couple seems to swing slow, but clearly he must have high swing speed generated from arms or upper body. Um, it comes from both. I mean, he's swinging with both his body and his arms. All the best players are. They there's no players that are good that only use their body and don't really use their arms, and vice versa. Yeah, he swings very fast. I mean, he swings 115 plus probably. I don't know if he does now necessarily, but yeah, it just looks slow um, because he sequences pretty well. But yeah, he uses his arms, he uses his body. It's both. Peo says, any idea what Corey Pavin's swing speed is and why is someone like him unable to swing faster and hit it farther? I don't know what it is. I know it wasn't super high. He didn't hit the ball very far. And I would say the reason someone like him may not be able to swing faster might, I mean, I don't know for sure, but um, when you're smaller, it is difficult. Corey Pavin's not a big guy. Um, let's see here. Yeah, 5'9", 155 pounds, right? Now, there are players of that stature that hit the ball pretty far, but they train that, right? So, like a Ricky Fowler, like Justin Thomas, right? That that wasn't really something that, I mean, these are more modern players that I'm talking about. These are players that, um, you know, speed is something that they're going for, right? So it's not that he can't swing it faster. He certainly can. I'm sure he could if he trained it. I don't know if he trains it or not. But yeah, if you're a smaller person, it definitely makes it more difficult, right? Most of the longest hitters in the world are not small people. Most of them are pretty large. Uh, or bigger than average for sure. What is a good launch angle for sand wedge? 30 degrees. All right, we got a few minutes left here if we have any more questions. Dana W says, "What is the significance of your minor wall hanging?" That's a school that I went to, South Dakota School of Mines and Technology. They're the Hard Rockers, so that's the mascot. His name is Grubby. What is a good launch angle for a lob? Same thing, 30 degrees. For a wedge launch angle, that's 30 degrees is where they're launching it at. If you want to lower the launch, you have to get more shaft lean, right? So we got to get our hands more in front, right, to get to launch it lower. That's the number one thing that lowers the launch. You can also hit down on it more. That also lowers the launch. But the biggest influence is going to be on how far forward the shaft is leaning. If you're struggling with that, then what you can do is do the stick drill. So that's where you take an alignment stick, you put it down the shaft like this, right? Half of it going out the butt end, half of it going down the shaft. And then you can make swings where you keep the stick from hitting you. Right? So you can see if I let it hit me, I'm getting rid of my shaft lean. If I keep it from hitting me, I keep my shaft lean, right? So you can do that, but I will say you will have a really, really hard time with that if you don't attack the root cause. There's typically two reasons why people tend to early release the club. Now there could be other reasons, obviously, but these are kind of the two main ones. One, coming down steep in the start of the downswing and then standing up. So if you start down steep and then you stand up to shallow it out, that's going to make you early release. Now you're shallowing out the club, which is better than not shallowing out the club, but you're going to early release with it, right? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is an open club face. So releasing the club, that's a way to get the club face from open to square, right? Releasing the club closes the club face. So if I'm coming down to have this face open, right, I may release it early to square it up, right? Because most golfers aren't going to just keep that face open and keep turning through and keep the hands in front, right? Most golfers are going to release it to square it up. So getting that club face more closed can also help you. So the 20-minute shallowing fix may be somewhere where you want to go because that attacks both of those things. It attacks getting the club to shallow out and it attacks getting the club face more closed. So that would be one. And then working through the top speed golf system, because if your spine angles are off, you're probably going to release it early. If you're not getting a good turn, you're probably going to release it early. If you're casting the club, basically releasing it from the start, you're not going to have anything left at impact. That's the third piece of the top speed golf system. If you are really bumped out with the hips and not rotating through, right, then that the hips bumping forward and jamming things up with the hips can make you release the club early, right? And then obviously working through the straight line release where you're specifically focusing on that, right? So, and you have to work through those pieces in order, by the way. You can't just go, if your spine angles are way off, you can't just skip to the straight line release section because it's going to be near impossible for you to do it if your spine angles aren't in a good spot. So those would be the things I'd recommend doing. Stick drill. If you're running into issues with the stick drill, which you likely will, very, very highly likely that you will, almost guaranteed, I would say, is that you will find it impossible to do it in a full length swing if you're someone who's early releasing right now, because you're likely coming down steep and or the face is open or a part of the Tosfigel system is off, and you need to work through those drills. Dan W says, thanks. That is the answer I was looking for with the wedge questions. Aiming for a 30-degree launch angle regardless of the spin or the wedge loft. Yeah. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up right there. Thanks everybody for joining me. We'll be back here tomorrow, Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. No office hours on Friday. Just a heads up, we got a clinic on Friday, so no office hours on Friday. But we will be here tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day.